Hey guys, and welcome back to the Art and Business of Writing podcast. Have you ever thought about putting together your own magazine? Well, my guest today is going to tell you just how to do that. Seth Casana is the founder and editor-in-chief at Whurk magazine. Since 2013, Whurk has been a champion of the independent cultural community in Virginia. Distributed statewide and online, the publication features interviews with artists, album reviews, poetry, literature, and comics. Seth currently resides in Fredericksburg, where he's an active member of the local art scene. He was chair of the Fredericksburg Arts Commission from 2012 to 2014, presents frequently at the storytelling event Tell Fredericksburg, and plays a sousaphone in the band LB Brass. That's impressive.
Yes, it's all true.
That's very cool. Welcome to the show, Seth.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Oh man, no, great. So hey, tell us about yourself. I mean, just who you are, just some of your interests. Because after reading that, I'm like, man, he's got a lot of things, a lot of cool stuff happening.
I am interested in a lot of things, and I typically have a lot of irons in the fire. Um, I grew up and have spent basically most of my life in Virginia. Went to JMU for undergrad, where I bounced around a whole lot, if you can't already tell. I started as a music industry major with a tuba concentration, never thinking that I would go on to play in a band like that, but I was in the Marching Royal Dukes for a couple of years out there. Then I switched to 3D animation because I wanted to make video games. Then I finished as a philosophy major. Went to grad school for that at Carnegie Mellon, studying philosophy of science. Moved to Fredericksburg, where I was the webmaster at University of Mary Washington for a few years. And now, in addition to a day job in web development, I do all of those other creative extracurricular projects at the same time. So there's always sort of a lot going on in my life.
I know. You ever see that movie, Dude, Where's My Car?
No, I haven't.
Oh gosh, you're not missing anything. But there's this one scene where he's talking to these Asian ladies, and they keep saying "and then," and then, and then.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought of when you were saying that. I'm like, okay, Seth does this, and then, and then, and then.
There's a lot of. I don't really play sports. It's one of the things I don't do. I've never really been interested in sports, and I'm not very good at playing woodwind instruments. So. But most everything else, I try to stay up on.
No, that's cool. Like I've seen LB Brass perform live before, and it is always a hoot, man. It is always such a good time.
Thank you. That's what we shoot for.
So, all right. So, tell me a little bit about Whurk. How did that get started?
So, in Fredericksburg, we've got a newspaper, the Freelance Star, and we had couple local publications, the Front Porch being the main one, but there wasn't really any like outlet. There wasn't an alternative magazine, and even though some of those other outlets were covering the kinds of independent art and cultural work that we cover at Whurk, I just want to point out to people listening to this that that's WHURK. It might be a little difficult to tell just from listening to this, but people weren't writing about the stuff that was going on around in the community in the way that I thought should have been. They weren't getting the proper representation. And I've always felt that that's sort of like half of doing any kind of creative effort, or really anything at all. Like half of it is doing it, right? You have to actually do the thing well. And then the other half of it is you have to tell people that you're doing it. If you're just slaving away in your basement making something, it might be the most amazing thing in the world, right? But no one's ever going to know about it, and you'll never reap any of the benefits of having done it unless you tell people, And so there's a printing press here in Fredericksburg. It's the printing press of the Freelance Star. It's called Print Innovators. And I'm also a cartoonist. I don't know if I mentioned that in the bio, but and I was drawing a comic at the time, and I was looking around at different print shops of where to get it printed. And Print Innovators came up when I was doing some research, but it was way above the scale of what I needed at the time. But I was really curious, and so later I went back to them, and I didn't really have any connections there. I didn't know much about what they did or the services they offered, but I just said, hey, I'm Seth. I want to print a comic book. I had no idea of doing like an art magazine at the time. I said, what's the least amount of money I can give you to print something for me? I want no frills, all the cheapo stuff, give me some quotes. Thankfully, they were really open to talking with me and indulging all of my questions, and they did give me some quotes, and they were a lot less than I thought they were going to be, which got me thinking, this could be a real thing. This could be bigger than just sort of a one-off side project. That's when I called up Stephen Graham, who's another sort of like similarly all over the place creative friend, and said, Stephen, what do you think about making an arts magazine for Fredericksburg? And he was like, yeah, that sounds really cool. Let's figure it out. So for the next 6 months, this was back in March of 2012 was when I first approached them. And we spent about 6 months just kind of hashing through what it was going to be. What format, what kinds of articles did we want to put in it? Was it going to be free? Were we going to charge for it? Was it going to have advertising? What range did we want to distribute it? There was, all these kinds of questions when you're starting from a blank slate, and really there's nothing holding you back. Everything's on the table, and you have to make all those decisions. We did have a few guiding principles about how we wanted to run the thing structurally. We knew we wanted it to be about the arts and everything, but it was like, if we're doing this, we want it to be sort of self-sustaining. We didn't want to have to take on a lot of investors or take out loans or dump a whole bunch of our own money into it. We wanted it to more or less fund itself for as long as we were doing it. And so after we came up with the name, we got the website, and then we started talking to other people in the community who we thought would make good contributors. People who were writing poetry. We had a short story, which is kind of like a literature as journalism piece that Lindley Etz did way back then. We because it was in print, one of the things we wanted, we've got to have a pinup. That's just got to be one of the things in here. So we shot the pinup piece, and I wrote the articles. Originally, it was basically me writing all the articles and Steven, who's a photographer, taking all the pictures. And I went around and handled the distribution and ad sales, and Steven did all the layout. So it was very much like a two-man show in the beginning as far as putting everything together. Thankfully, we've grown a lot more since then. It was a ridiculous amount of work. The name is really apt. That first year, it was unsustainable, the amount of work that we were doing putting it together. But you kind of have to do stuff like that when you're getting started on any project. You got to figure it out first before you can systematize everything. And we did not know what the heck we were doing for many aspects. We were good on graphic design. My background in academic writing gave me a foundation for just writing articles. It was actually the first time that I was doing journalism that way, and it felt very freeing to have more of a creative voice. Whereas, when I was doing graduate school work, everything is very dry, very straight to the point, not a lot of room for creative expression. So this was a nice change of pace from that. And so it took a year, right? Once we had we had the first issue's content put together between the stuff that I had written, his photography, the other pieces that had been submitted. And I took that, he had a large format printer, and we printed one copy of it, right, on large print, stapled together. And then I walked around to hundreds of places in Fredericksburg and showed it to people and said, hey, check it out. We're making a magazine. Do you want to distribute it here? Do you want to buy an ad in it? And eventually enough people said yes to those questions to where I was like, okay, we're going to do that first print run. Let's do it. And we printed it, and they made 10,000 copies of it, which is the least amount that they would make. Like I said, there's a very large format printer. Their printing press is literally a factory that's 3 stories tall and can produce hundreds of thousands of copies in the blink of an eye. And so that was 45 months ago, and we've been cranking them out once a month for the past 45 months.
Woo! Man, I tell you, man, no, I love those stories. I love those stories of people who like, yeah, we got an idea and we're gonna do it. Like it makes me think about Jerry Maguire, like who's with me, who's gonna do this with me, And unfortunately, it was just Dorothy and the goldfish. But you.
It's totally like that. That's an analogy.
But you got it done, man. You got Steven. You guys got it done. So let's unpack all that. Let's talk about basically the foundation, like the roots. You talked about determining. Okay, so from idea, you decided you had an idea. Did you like run the idea past anyone other than Steven and say, hey, look, anybody in the arts community say, hey, we're putting this art magazine together. What do you guys think about this? Do you think it'll work? Do you think it'll not? Like, did you vet it out, or did you say, we're just going to do it? It's a done deal.
I mean, I was talking about it to anybody who had listened, definitely. Getting feedback like that is important. On the other hand, the reason why it's been as successful as it has is because Steven and I have a very productive working relationship. We both think similarly in terms of like the way we solve problems, and the best conversations that Steven and I have together are like sitting and just bouncing ideas off of each other for 2 hours, and we can just keep going indefinitely that way. And so that was a lot of what the first part was. Is like, well, how can we do this? Well, what if we had like a puzzle thing in the back of the magazine, or just that kind of stuff. At the very beginning was more or less like bouncing ideas off each other for weeks on end. And then the vetting part of it really came when I started going around with the magazine. Up until that point, it had been more or less in like stealth mode to some extent. I mean, I was talking to people who I thought would make good contributors. We didn't really have a plan for bringing on other writers in the very beginning. The plan was just, I'll write the stories,
Lean startup, man.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing was that, like, for the first year or two, like, pretty much everything was done on a volunteer basis. That was the only way. I mean, we all of the money went towards the printing run, and virtually I would do anything to save like $50 or $100. Like when it came time to manage our distribution, we needed to get magazine racks, and I was looking around like trying to figure out where the heck do you buy a magazine rack. You can't just go to Walmart and pick one up. And all of these things are made in China. You have to buy them in bulk, or there's like weird sketchy resellers that deal only with newspapers they've been around for like 50 years, and they've got a big warehouse of them somewhere. And even if we had wanted the things that they were selling, we did not have the money. We just like couldn't drop $500 on buying a couple dozen of these things, So at the printing press, I said, "Hey, do you have any pallets?" And they were like, "Yeah, we have tons of them. We pay people to take them away and recycle them. Do you want any?" So we hauled off a bunch of the pallets that were in the best condition and ripped them apart and spent a day just like hammering them together. We designed our own noose rack that was made from reclaimed pallet wood and built like a dozen of them. And those things are still kicking around today, like 4 years later.
Wow, dude, there are women who use Pinterest right now who are listening who are probably very excited to hear that.
Oh yeah, I got the plans. If anybody's, they're very, I don't know why you'd want one of these in your house. You have
like, whoa,
magazines coming to your place. Maybe if you run a little shop or something and you want to build your own magazine rack, they would be good.
Yeah, and I just think you type in pallet in Pinterest, man, you see all kinds of crazy things people do with pallets.
Got a better design now. I've come up with a better design.
Oh, nice.
To make. But back to your original question, vetting it was important because we had no idea if other people would like it. I mean, Steven and I knew that we liked this. We were gung-ho. We were spending a year just, with no guarantee that anything was going to come of it, putting it together. And as soon as I started asking people, I got a lot of tough questions. I got people I'm trying to sell ads in a weirdo indie art magazine that doesn't exist, and people are justifiably saying, how do I know that you're going to be around in 3 months? They were like, how long have you lived in Fredericksburg? you know, and
Oh
I had
man.
to be confident and say, well, I have a good track record. I've made a lot of stuff in the past. You can ask other people here, and this is definitely going to happen. You had to look people in the eye, tell them that, and have them believe you. And fortunately, enough people did. And even some of those skeptical folks ended up buying ads. They liked what they saw.
It's always the toughest part of starting up something like that is just that whole credibility factor. Because yeah, people do this like I'm spending my money. You're gonna be here for issue
Yeah,
2 and 3, right? But
you have to make people feel confident in what you're doing.
so just starting off with a magazine, how do you settle on a rate card that's going to help you to at least break even in the publishing aspect?
For that first issue that I was talking about, the hand printed one, we had a set number of pages where we wanted the ads to go. And on those pages, we just printed our rate sheet. And I figured the rate sheet based on how much it was going to cost for us to be printing the thing, how much I reasonably thought people would be willing to pay for an ad, and then structuring other incentives based around our capacity to collect payments. So in the advertising world, there's a lot of, you'll get into contract situations, right? Like if you're dealing with a normal magazine, not like a tiny indie startup magazine, they're going to want year-long contracts, and they'll have lawyers and collection departments and all that stuff to sort of ensure that everything goes along smoothly. But we didn't have any of that, right? So we needed to figure out, we wanted people to buy longer campaigns. We wanted people to not just go month to month. And so we needed to figure out a way to structure the billing process so that happened and we could manage it all. And the best thing that we came up with, it's still the way that it works now, is that you get a discount for buying more ads, more issues worth of ads, but the payments are front loaded, right? So rather than spacing it out, if you let's say you bought a year's worth of ads, instead of paying 4 payments over 12 months, you would pay 4 payments over 4 months, and then the last 8 you would just be riding off of what you paid. And what that does for us is that it, if let's say somebody sends in the first payment, and then the next month comes around and they don't pay, we can just stop printing their ad. So, and all of the percentages and payment structures are basically designed very specifically so that we don't ever end up holding the bag. Maybe you get 1 issue's worth of ads printed in, but we will have already collected some money from you, and we just won't print any more of your ads. It's basically a fail-safe so that as long as people are compliant with the invoices, that we keep printing their ads and everybody's happy. And as soon as some of that stops, we're not worried about litigating with them. We don't have to bring them to court to collect on some contract. We just keep the money they sent and stop printing their ads, and then resume when they start paying again. It's things like that where you have to protect yourself well.
Yeah, right. Because with the magazines, naturally advertising drives that, so you have to make sure that that's always in place and that the money's always there. Is your magazine is it a free publication or is it a paid publication?
It's free, and that's also another big dilemma of how do we want to structure this? If it's free, it's really hard to change from one to the other. It's easier to go from a paid to a free. It's really hard to go from a free to a paid. Nobody wants to see that happen. And so you kind of have to make these decisions at the very beginning before you have any data to back it up or, proof of concept. And for us, it really went back to the original mission, which was we want people to be reading this. We don't want it to be a very small niche. The whole idea was to kind of expand the visibility of the creative work that people are doing in the region, and as we've expanded across Virginia. So having it be paid, one, would drastically limit the number of readers we would have. And in turn, if we ever wanted to sell any kind of advertising, that would just make it that much less interesting to potential advertisers. You have a smaller readership, they don't care about your publication as much. So, and then also it's so much simpler with distribution. If we did it where it was a paid publication, every place where we were distributing it, we would have had to go and like invoice them and collect payment from them. And that's just like, that seems like a nightmare to me. I just have seen stuff from the freelance since they are doing the printing of it. You know, they've got whole divisions devoted to collecting those payments and keeping track of it all. This way, when it's a free publication, like just walk into a store where I think it would be good to distribute. I go up to anybody working there and I'm like, hi, I published this magazine. Do you want to distribute it here? And they're like, yeah, that looks great. We'll put it over there. Like that's the extent of the transaction. I give them a business card, I put them on the list, and they're done, and we start mailing it to them. It was an important decision, but I think I've never regretted it being paid.
Yeah, and you actually answered my next question, which was, really what's the benefit to you in being free, which you did answer. Logistically, it kind of keeps you out of having to assume another responsibility, but it also adds to your distribution that you can distribute more when it's free. And then on the other side, the benefit to the advertiser, which again, it's another distribution thing. Well, if it's more widely distributed, the advertiser's ad is going to get in the hands of more potential customers.
Yeah, I mean, we're in like 400 locations plus across the state right now.
How do you determine where you distribute your magazine?
Well, originally, for the first year or so, it was just the Fredericksburg Cultural Review. That was the tagline. And that limited where we were distributing. So, the majority of it was in Fredericksburg and the surrounding areas. And then even from the beginning, we wanted it to go outside of the immediate area. So Alexandria and Richmond, that was kind of the extent of our range up and down 95. And even that was sort of limited to how far I could drive in a weekend because I was doing the deliveries the first year. I would load my minivan up and go north on a Saturday and then south on a Sunday and walk the streets and drop them off every month. But as we expanded, as we said, okay, we want this to be for all of Virginia. We don't want to have, people would be submitting things to us and go, well, I'm from Woodbridge. Does that count as the Fredericksburg region? And you're like, I don't know. So we just said, forget it. We're growing. We want it to be inclusive. Let's just make it all of Virginia. So the way that we pick now, a really big part of it comes from being able to find local folks who want to be a champion for the magazine. The first place that we expanded to was Norfolk. And I had a buddy from college, Davy Jones, who was a writer and had known about the magazine from the beginning, but was sort of out of the range of where we were covering. But he knew other writers and poets and would send them our way. And after a while of doing that, he sent me an email. It was like, hey, is there any way that we can get some physical copies down here in Norfolk? Because all these people who know the folks that you've been publishing, they've never seen the magazine and they're really eager to check it out. And so it was him, saying if we start distributing down there, he will be in charge of managing the routes and writing about stuff in Norfolk. That's what, so there's lots of little communities, little, big, whatever, across Virginia that have art scenes going on, but how we can expand to all of them depends on having someone like that there primarily. The things that we look for now, we need someone to be in charge of distribution, right? So each month we will send them a shipment of the magazines and like a list of all the places where they're supposed to go, how many they're supposed to drop off, and they keep track of making sure that all those places, the copies are getting picked up. We need somebody who's writing about stuff that's happening locally there. And then if they aren't, also a photographer in the area who can take pictures, because that's a big part of what we do with the layout. And then, so as we, in that second year, really, there was a concerted push to say, we're going to be expanding.
Now, was like scalability built into your original model?
No, I mean, when we first started, we didn't specifically plan on it becoming that way. Really, what changed it was that it's sort of ridiculous when I look back on it. When my buddy Davey asked me, "Can you ship down to Norfolk?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll figure that out." So my plan, there was a moment where this was going to be the plan. I figured out that an empty wine box was about the same size as like 5 bundles of the magazine, and I knew somebody who owned a wine bar, so I was going to be collecting their old wine boxes, shipping, stuffing them all with the magazine, boxing it up, and shipping that to the UPS from another friend who had like a commercial shipping license with them. Uh, and I went to Print Innovators one day, and I was like, okay, so I got this crazy cockamamie scheme. What's the fastest I can get them when they come off the line so I can pack them up? And they're like, Seth, you're ridiculous. Half of our business is shipping things places. Like, we print them and then we mail them. Would you like us to mail something to Norfolk for you, Seth? And I was like, oh, yeah, that would be great. so, so from once I realized that, we had been doing it enough that we were in a routine. We knew that it was that people actually liked this. We had become like marginally profitable, and we had a model that we could bring other people into. Like when you're first doing it, you don't have any of your processes down. You don't know what the heck is going on. But after you've done it a while, you can say, yes, people down in Norfolk, please write the story like this, submit it like this. You can start working with other people to expand what you're doing. And being able to mail the copies somewhere and have someone on the other end pick them up and distribute them, that was sort of the trigger that changed it from being a regional paper to a statewide paper.
I hope everyone's enjoying listening to your mind work. I mean, from pallets to large format printers to wine boxes, like you thought of it all, man. It's all about getting it done. It's like the end game. So you developed Whurk. It's 4th year coming up in March, and you've gone from just small arts community in Fredericksburg to all across the state. You've got the website. Is the website a collection of all the? Well, before I get to that. Is each issue regional specific? Like or is it all the same content?
It's the same issue, and it goes to all the regions. That's an important aspect of what it is. The whole point is that when you're reading Whurk in its current form, you read about things that are happening near you. You read about things that are happening in other places. You maybe read about somewhere where you didn't even know was on the map because it's some little rural hamlet out in the long tail of Virginia, but we try to pick things that all kind of get back to that independent culture, independent arts theme, and we have writers. We really try to find top-notch writers, people who don't want to just do journalism, but they want to tell a really compelling story through their journalism. And so thematically it all fits together, but it's a big grab bag of regions and genres and topics.
That's good to know, for whoever may be listening that wants to create a magazine and wants to scale it the way you did, that it doesn't have to be, specific content to specific regions, that it can all be just one cohesive magazine, much like a national magazine would be.
Yeah, people ask if we have themes too. That's a common question that comes up when people want to submit to it. We don't really, in general, know. There's not we don't have like the ceramics issue or something like that. It's just, it's more based around timely stuff that's happening. We always want to be writing about current events, more or less.
And how often are you publishing?
It's once a month. It comes out once a month. It's still like in the 10,000, 15,000 range. It fluctuates based on circulation for each of the locations. And the other big thing that we've added in the past couple of years is a native online version of it. In the very beginning, it was only in print. Like, I would talk to people and they would be flabbergasted that there could be something like this that didn't have a website. You had to read it in print. It was shocking to them. But soon after that, like, people wanted to to see old issues. So we had like sort of the equivalent of a PDF reader where you could literally flip through the pages, which was okay for archival purposes, but not really that great of a reading experience on the whole. And then so a couple years ago, we made a big lift to have digital versions of articles and like really have the website be a place where you could go just to read it as your only source of it, not in print. And that's still that it's been sort of like a learning process of teasing out the right way to have the two of those things tied together. It's nice because online you have so much more flexibility in terms of the amount of content you can put up there. Print is a lot less forgiving as far as photography is concerned, layout. You just can't put everything in print that you can online. So the way we have it now, every article links back to its online one, and we say, see more of this at this link.
So how is your editorial calendar determined?
So we've got writers located in the larger regions where we are, and collectively we all keep our ears out for stuff that's happening. I'm constantly sort of like scouring Facebook and other sites to see events that are coming up, if like a band is releasing an album, or if there's some art exhibit coming up, or book being published. And we've been around long enough that people send us press releases too. Like I've made an effort to do like outreach where I'll go to a museum and I'll try to track down the person who does the PR and introduce myself and be like, hey, here's my card. Anytime you got a press release, just send it to this address. And so now that's also a good thing. We added a calendar, which is free. Like it's sort of like a classified listings, monthly events calendars that people can just submit events to. So that's another way that we get leads. And then, so we filter through all of that stuff. We try to figure out for each issue, we don't want it to come all from one region, and we don't want it to all be the same type of thing. Like we don't want to have like an issue that's only band interviews or something like that. And then so balancing, making it a nice mix of material with also writing about stuff that's timely. Ideally, we want to publish about things that are coming up in the future, so that when if you're reading the article and you get to the end of it, it says, want to see this? Go to the event next week. It's not as great when you write about something that happened like already in the past, or if there's like nothing at all. But so just striving to keep all of the content timely and current.
I would think that's a great benefit to the reader too, because then they get excited about who they just read about, and then they can actually take action on that.
Yeah, I say to all the writers, if you can't think of a real concrete call to action for the end of the article, it might not be the right time to feature that subject. We can wait until they are doing something, and it doesn't need to be huge. It can be anything. It could be they're teaching a class that happens every month, or they're playing at a bar. Like as long as there's something specific.
So what's next for Whurk?
We've been looking at ways to expand our revenue stream beyond just advertising, and one of the things that we're looking at now is sponsorships. So you can think of these as being more like how NPR will have like a underwriter announcement, where they're not technically advertising, but they're more saying like, we're a sponsor of the work that's being done here. And right now we're setting up for the 2017 year sponsorship packages where promote your logo, and then we'll work with you to figure out what's going on in your area as a sponsor that you think would be important to highlight in the magazine. Sort of a more collaborative approach rather than just like buying a quarter page ad every month. So that's interesting. We just released this month a mixtape with 36 bands from all different genres. It's like 2 hours of music, and that's a free download for anybody who takes our first ever reader survey. We're trying to get a better idea. The thing about publishing something like this, especially the print stuff, which is still the main way that people read this, is that there's not a ton of feedback, right? Like we see that the magazines get picked up, when you talk to people individually, they're typically excited about it, but it's really mostly one way. So this reader survey coupled with the mixtape is our first like big dedicated way to get some feedback that will help us make better decisions about the kind of features that we include, or we take on special projects sometimes, like we host concerts or film screenings or things like that. But we've got lots of ideas. We just don't know which ones people would appreciate the most. So we're trying to get some visibility on that. That you can, if you want to participate in that or check out the mixtape, it's at whurk.org/mixtape.
I think it's awesome that I can get a mixtape without like having to come to the back of your car.
Well, if you want one of those, you can call me up. I might have a few to give you.
Very cool. All right, we're going to kind of come in for a landing. Is there anything else that you want to share before we close out?
If this is a thing that you're interested in doing for yourself, starting a publication this way, my best advice would be to really make sure that you figure out how it's going to become sustainable. When I think about any art in general, I consider art to be the stuff that comes after surviving, right? Like you got to take care of survival first, and then once you've done that, you're free to be creative and take liberties with your creative expression. And you can sort of broadly classify art on like a spectrum of being very accessible and then being very like esoteric, difficult to understand. And then you can also look at funding models in the same way. You can look at a very like democratic, broad-based funding model where lots of people are contributing little amounts. And then you can look at like a very high-profile single large donor or small collections of donors, like a De Medici or something. So if you look at any creative project on those two spectrums, you need to make sure that the thing you're making is in alignment with the way you're funding it. If you make a very esoteric magazine that very few people are going to be able to appreciate, but you want it to be funded by thousands and thousands of small contributions, you're going to run into problems, Whereas if you make a very broad appeal magazine and you only want it to be sponsored by one major sponsor, you got to make sure that the message that you're saying resonates with those few sponsors for all the people who are reading it. And I feel like not analyzing those kind of like funding questions from the beginning dooms a lot of publications to a short lifespan. It's a hard question to nail down, but you can't come up with a good answer if you don't ask it in the first place.
No, that's a good point, because it's not enough just to have the great idea, but being able to know how the idea is going to pan out, how it's going to be funded, how it's going to be received. Can you sustain it? Like you said, just that sustainability. Can I see myself doing this? If not month to month, can I do it bi-monthly? Can I do it quarterly at the very least? Because that's pretty much the lowest that you can go, really, and have any sort of following or any sort of ad revenue follow you anywhere.
Once you get beyond the sort of like experimental one-offs, you have to start looking at questions of sustainability and funding, and a lot of times it's hard for creative types to confront those questions head on, and I'd say the longer you put it off, the worse situation you'll be in. Better to like tackle that up front.
Right, and even from my own experiences working in magazines in that space, one of the key pitfalls is not to compare rate cards with an established publication.
Oh yeah. If you want to be sneaky about it, just pretend you have something to advertise and like send an email to a bunch of other magazines and be like, "Hi, can I get your rate card?" And they'll send it to you, and then you'll have a bunch of stuff to start from.
All right, guys, you've been with me and Seth from Whurk. Definitely be sure to check out Whurk at whurk.org to learn more about the cultural and arts magazine that's all across Virginia. You can learn how you can be a part of that, and definitely look them up also on Facebook, facebook.com/Whurk.